This is Keys to the Shop, episode number 9, and today we're learning how to approach your shop's data with Simon Ouderkirk. Hello and welcome to Keys to the Shop. This is a podcast that is dedicated to giving you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. And today we get to dive into how we should approach the data, the metrics, and measurements we use to run a healthy shop. So kind of a big topic, and having the right approach is the first thing that we need to start with. And, in my position, I'm always looking at the data on the back end of the POS. I'm a cafe operations manager for Center Goss Coffee here in Louisville. We've got 3 stores, and so I'm always like nose deep in the numbers, looking at the performance of the stores. And use the data to make decisions that ultimately will impact the experience that the staff and customers have at the business. And hopefully I'm using that data well. Got a lot out of this discussion today that is just going to make me better at my job for sure. But, there's a ton of information that we have access to with these point of sale systems. Most of them come equipped with a lot of back-end analytics, and it all comes with just a few clicks. And without an understanding or a foundational understanding of data's place in the life of your shop, it can easily be used either improperly or not to its full potential. So today, to help us unpack these things is our special guest, Simon Ouderkirk. So let's tell you a little bit about who Simon is. Simon is a former coffee professional working in hospitality on the internet. He leads a team of customer support and success professionals at Automattic, which is the company behind WordPress.com, WooCommerce, and JetPack. He's obsessed with making data and statistics accessible to all humans. Thank you, Simon. And is an IBM Watson Analytics Innovator for 2016. So, yeah, he has a lot of great things to say here. The guy knows what he's talking about. He's also a really great guy, Simon. Today, he's going to help us look at a lot of things, including data's role in the shop, thinking of measurements as a means to an end and not an end in and of themselves, being open about numbers and revenue with your staff, and a lot more. It's just a fantastic conversation. I found it very helpful, and I think you're going to find it helpful too. So here is my interview with Simon Ouderkirk on how to approach your shop's data. So we have with us Simon Ouderkirk of Automattic, the company behind WordPress.com, WooCommerce, JetPack. Simon, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, Chris. I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's really great to have you on the show here. It's been a few years since I've spoken with you, and it's really great to reconnect and especially talk about something that is really a passion of yours. I've been following some of your work on your blog, fast12k.com, your blog where you write about big data and tech and metrics and things that are just, as a manager, I resonate because I kind of get into the numbers a lot. And I know a lot of our audience is in the background of Square, their POS or ShopKeep or whatever they use. Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to be a really exciting show. I guess I have just a beginning question for you is, what does it mean to work in hospitality on the internet?
Okay, sure. Well, first, let me thank you for plugging my blog. I haven't been so active lately, but I do try to keep it up. And I try to focus a little bit on my own, this is going to sound silly, I guess, but my own vision for what I think of almost as like small data. I think right now there's a real fetishization around kind of math and data, like big data, in scare quotes. And I think almost any business can really benefit from taking a critical eye at the information they have. And you don't need a statistician or like a data scientist to gain real significant advantages and like benefits to your bottom line from the information you have. So yeah, I hope part of something we can kind of talk about and something we can take away from this conversation today is like, don't be scared of numbers, like small wins are still wins. And so let me actually answer your question. You asked, what does it mean to work in hospitality on the internet? So broadly, just defining our terms, right? I kind of try to divide customer interactions into two big buckets. And those two big buckets are service or support and hospitality. So customer service, customer support, for me, represents any time a person from your company interacts with a customer. So if you email WordPress.com and a member of my team emails you back, right? That's a service moment. If you go to a cafe and you pay the cashier, like that's a moment of service as well, right? And then hospitality represents the kind of sum total of everything else that your customer kind of engages in with your company. So when I see an advertisement for your company, like that's in some way like within the sphere of hospitality. Much more kind of measurably is the idea of like the way that your shop looks, right? Like if you have a messy dairy station, like I am gaining an impression of your company even though I'm not interacting with anyone who works there, right?
Right.
So you can imagine in a situation like WordPress.com where we have thousands of customers who use our product but never ever contact us. This is a uniquely different thing about an internet-based company and many pieces of software. That is, the way that we interact with our customers is almost primarily through hospitality. So really thinking a lot about the environment, thinking a lot about the customer experience outside of employee interaction becomes way more important in these like subscription-based models. Whereas like in a cafe, you're pretty much guaranteed that your customer is going to engage in service at some point because they've got to pay. They've got to talk with a human to pay and to kind of pick up their things. Unless you're running like a really advanced vending machine or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean when I say that. And I think that division between service or support and hospitality is something that I definitely came with out of working in coffee. And that was the kind of thing that way of thinking really helped me to kind of structure the way that I think about software as well.
Yeah, reading a lot about your philosophy on data and its role in our lives, in particular your area, being a software as a service company, mm-hmm. you're needing to interpret those moments in a way that your eyes really can't. Your eyes are seeing the data, but they're not seeing the person's furrowed brow. They're not, right there in front of you like they are in a cafe, just like you said. Mm-hmm. But I can definitely tell that some of that hospitality experience that you had from coffee. You worked in coffee for how many years before you went full-time into tech?
Oh, gosh. Well, my first job in coffee, like a lot of folks, I think, was at Starbucks, while I was in grad school. So that must have been like 2007. And then I've been at Automattic for like 3 years now. So like 5, 6, 7 years in coffee. And I mean, it kind of depends what you mean by that, right? Like working as a barista at Starbucks, I think is different than like creating an educational program for a chain of bakeries, Like those
yes.
are pretty different jobs.
Oh, yeah, sure. I heard somebody in one of our previous podcasts, baristas speak from Coffee Champs, that she's been proud of the coffee she's made for X number of years, mm-hmm. as a way of separating those years prior. So I understand. So that plays a big role in the way that you view data. But do you have sort of like a working philosophy of what it is data, or what is data in metrics, and how does it play a role in our lives?
Wow. Okay. So we can kind of parse this out a little bit. So data is just like this massive dump truck of like bits and bytes and like ups and downs and like 1 through 100s, different pieces of information. And then when we talk about like metrics or measurements, that is sort of an interpretation or like an instrumentation of that huge like dumpster of information. Okay. Or maybe not, maybe that's the wrong metaphor, right? Like not a dumpster. The nature of measurement is you're sort of necessarily and by design reducing the precision of something to allow you to better understand it, sort of with your human brain. So this is maybe better understood through a metaphor or an example. And the example I kind of like to lean on is the idea of a map, right? So, and I assume your listeners are familiar with paper maps. I know it's 2017. Everybody's got Google Maps, but Google Maps, started as a piece of paper, and that paper has a drawing of like the land on it. The nature of a map is you're trying to accomplish a goal. You're trying to get from point A to point B, and the landscape itself just provides you too much information. You can't simply like look out and know which direction you need to go. So you find or acquire a map, and the map by design includes much less information than the landscape itself, right? Like a map which was 100% accurate would be 100% useless because it would be as complicated as the terrain you're trying to traverse. So we intentionally reduce the amount of information such that it allows us to make better decisions. It allows us to get the information we need out of a much bigger piece of like data. And the reason that's important is because that abstraction away, right, that reduction of precision gives us greater freedom. It gives us the ability to make better choices. And the same is true if you go from like a 12 million row spreadsheet to a histogram, right, to a bar chart. Like you're intentionally reducing the complexity to illustrate something that allows you to actually make your life better. And I think the kind of danger in that, and the place where folks get kind of bound up, is where they lose sight of the fact that a metric is that abstraction, right? Like life is complicated. Life is super messy. And like you're using these metrics as a tool to reduce the messiness so that you can try to make better decisions. That doesn't mean that the metric like replaces the complexity. It doesn't mean that suddenly like the world is as simple as your measurements make it, right? And I think keeping in mind that your metrics are meant to be a means to a greater end, right? So an example that you might use in software would be something like, well, we want to reduce our churn rate, right? We want more people to keep buying a new subscription each year. And that's going to be our like gold star. That's the primary thing that we're pushing toward. Well, you can imagine that's not actually what you're pushing toward. What you actually want are like customers who love your product and keep coming back and refer their friends. But that's this really big, complicated, like difficult idea. So you boil it down to, here's the one measurement we're going to use to determine if we're getting where we want to go. But when you start to rely on that metric as an ends, rather than as a means to a much more abstract idea, you end up doing things like making people call your company to cancel their subscription, right? Which is irritating. And I don't think anybody really likes that. And it seems like kind of a blatant cash grab, right? And in that sense, you're sort of treating your metric, churn reduction, as the end itself, rather than keeping in mind the sense that it is a means to a greater end, which is super happy customers. So one example where you might come across this same problem in sort of running a cafe. So this might be something like, okay, we want to have a profitable cafe, and we want to have super delighted customers who engage in like referrals to their friends, and they come back all the time, and they write us nice reviews on Yelp. Okay, so you just want happy customers. This big, like abstract idea, kind of hard to understand how you can get from here to there. So you say something like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start measuring like the length of the line, like every 15 minutes. Like we're just going to kind of have somebody like take a picture from above, and then once a week, the assistant manager is just going to count it and put it on a spreadsheet. And that's going to be like our metric for success, because people hate waiting in line. So there's a lot of ways to game that, right? You end up in this place where you're like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to like just get people through the line really fast. Just get them through the line really fast, really fast, really fast. And then you end up not engaging in any kind of like cross-selling. You don't engage in any kind of that like thoughtful, helpful discussion that I think especially high-end coffee consumers really like dig, you know? Or maybe you're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take away all of our like line indicators, right? All of our like velvet ropes. So now people don't know where to stand in line. So it becomes really complicated. And then like even from the camera, you can't tell if someone's in line or not. So it's going to artificially like manipulate this metric. Like in that way, you're failing to delight your customers, but you're still improving the metric. So you're sort of mistaking the means for an end. That's kind of a long answer to your question.
That's fine.
Yeah, sorry.
I know. Well, it makes me want to ask another question, which is,
Yeah.
that in the cafe environment, we see the customer there all the time, and the people that see the customer the most are the baristas, and on shift management. And it's in any business, I think the higher up you get, or the farther away you get, based on your position in management, the more you rely on data to tell you the temperature of the room and how you're doing as a cafe. So you can say today is a really good day because we are, X% better than this time last year.
Yeah.
Year over year sales are better. So we're doing better. Now people could be spending that money begrudgingly, and you wouldn't know it because you're seeing this rosy picture in the form of data. What is it? And I know this is something that we need to grasp as a community, a coffee community, because we have all of these systems that offer us all of these numbers. But what is it? What do we need to be paying attention to on the map that will help us do both? Know what our customers are spending and how they're spending it, but not sacrifice that quality. Actually, this is a question that one of my managers, who I told I was talking to a data guy on the podcast. He had a question about how do we?
Is that me?
Yeah, you. He had a question about how do we inadvertently damage the cafe experience by focusing on data too much, and then the reverse. How do we balance that?
That's a great question, and in the most unsatisfying response, it depends. I can speak kind of in broad terms, but it's really gonna kind of rely on people who are out there to kind of figure out the best way to make this fit their particular situation. I think that concern is totally valid, especially once you start talking about like 2 locations, 3 locations, like multiple shifts, multiple like audience groups, and with a broad brush, data can tell you what's happening, but it can't tell you why it's happening, right? And in that way, in the same way that if you're a barista or you're a cashier even, and your job is like, okay, like from like 6 a.m. to like 11 a.m., like I help people online. Like I crank through it, and that's my job every day. And I have a very particular perspective of like the temperature of our customers. I have a very particular perspective on like the health of the business. I have this like deep understanding of the customers and their behaviors for this like time slice. Cool. Like there's value there. There's a real value there, but it's necessarily not the whole picture. And I would say if all you're doing is sort of reviewing your POS like backend data, you're in the same position. You might have a nicer office and you might not wear non-slip shoes, but you're similarly restrained in your ability to perceive the whole picture with only one piece of information, right? And in software, we say like, you got to talk to the customers. You got to talk to customer support. Like you need to get the full picture. And that's the same thing in a cafe setting, especially multi-unit retail. Like you can't rely on your data alone. You've got to talk to the people who are in these units. You've got to talk to people who are talking to the customers. And the reason you need to do that is because you don't just want to know that your revenue is increasing. You want to know why it's increasing. Because once you know why it's increasing, you can do that again, right? You can do it more. If all you know is the what, well, it becomes really difficult to like actually assign causation. And, we're humans. We're going to tend to assign causation in our own best interest, right? Like if your job is to mostly sit in an office and mostly deal with the P&L and mostly deal with like ordering and scheduling and kind of this back end type work, you're going to overweigh the value of that work because it's all that you really see, right? Whereas if you are a barista online and, you've been really working on your, Rosetta tulips for the last 2 months and P&L is indicating that the company's doing better, like you're going to have a tendency just kind of overassign your own responsibility for that, right?
Oh yeah,
and
those tulips, they're bringing them in.
Well, maybe they are. I don't know. But it's that kind of thing, And in the same way that we say like, oh well, it's silly that we would assign like revenue change to a single barista doing better tulips. I think it's just as silly to say like, oh well, I switched the schedule around on Monday and Tuesday, and now Monday and Tuesday are more profitable days. Like a single variable, especially in something as dynamic as like a retail cafe, a single variable is so very rarely actually a sort of like solo actor on that kind of thing. Unless it's something like, well, we've been serving spoiled milk and we stopped, things are generally very complex, and it's very tempting to kind of say like, well, our P&L is better this month, therefore we are better. Maybe you are better, or maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe Bonnaroo came to your town, right? Like there's a lot of possible explanations. And
I mean, it sounds like we have a particular bias towards what we interact with on a regular basis. And it kind of makes me think then we need to amass a certain kind of like a mutual fund of feedback, forms of feedback through data, through personal interaction with people to balance where we are in full knowledge that we have a bias towards a particular thing. Would you say that that's true? And how would you say that we can best balance that? Is it just over time you can get to see where the data actually does make a difference?
So as somebody who like spends some time like with spreadsheets and kind of coming on the show to like talk about kind of data and metrics and things like that, this is going to be like maybe a surprise. So like, here's the twist, right? You actually have to be willing to talk to people. And unfortunately, you've got to really cultivate relationships, and you've got to be willing and like really enthusiastic about hearing feedback that is not going to be like your favorite feedback to hear. Because I think in general, the folks who are kind of looking at metrics and really taking a deep dive into sort of POS backends are the boss or the assistant boss. And when you're in that position, like the power dynamic between you and the people who have information that can be really valuable to you is going to be really fraught. And if they don't feel like they can be honest with you and they don't feel like they can provide you like genuine feedback, you're never actually going to find out the why behind the what. And I know that kind of going and encouraging difficult feedback is less simple than learn Google Analytics, right? Like those are two very different directives. But I think there's a lot of value kind of locked up in the brains of the people on the front end. And I think part of that is probably due to fear.
Well, the brain is a computer, more or less, probably more. And, if you're accessing one computer to get data, then it makes sense that you would access those, 20 to 30 other computers that are taking in data as well, right?
And this is something that Jay Carragher used to super, super evangelize back when I was in these conversations. And that was, you can't insulate your staff from conversations about revenue. If folks that work on the floor sort of believe their job to be like make like great latte art and like engage in this really vision driven day-to-day work, then it's really easy for them to forget that like this is a company that needs to remain solvent, and all of the really great stuff that we like to do and that we love to do and that we're super enthusiastic about, like all of that on some level relies on financial solvency.
Yeah.
I just tell myself that every time I have to wait like 9 minutes for an espresso.
One of the things that when we go through the holiday season, as a business in hospitality, you go through a holiday season and that's like huge numbers, like you're watching the numbers. People are all about, at least I was like, are we going to have a record day during Christmas or whatever? And like we did, and we're like, oh man, that's the greatest. In to your point about, and to Jay's point about being open about revenue to employees, communicating that to them in such a way as to say, here's how that relates to what people feel about the business, and attaching perhaps some not hard data meaning to it, but just a softer meaning, like people are coming more often, which is a testimony to them wanting to be here more often and in some way. So at a certain point, you have to interpret the data to mean something so that you can communicate it to your staff. And like with gift card sales for us, I tend to tell people, we really want to pay attention to when those are being purchased and used and redeemed, because chances are it's a customer who really wants other people to experience what they experience at our store. I think that's a fair assessment of the data. And do I know that 100%? Not necessarily. I think it, again, is fair. Do you think that that's a fair interpretation of the data on our end?
That's hard. How do you know when you've got enough information to make a call? I don't know. That's that's really one of those things that's going to tie a lot into your own individual sort of tolerance for risk, right? I will say I think you got to make a decision. I think it's really easy to just wait for more information and to do more studies and to wait and to wait. I think if you can afford to make a decision, like you should, and you should follow that with more measurement, right? Like many times, if you make a big change, then you can at least on some level assume that what happens afterwards is related to that change, right? Yeah, I know, like that's a fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, like I studied philosophy. But you, at some level, like you've got to interpret, right? And I think that's a hard question to answer. I mean, is that like what's actually happening with the gift cards? I don't know. But on some level, it doesn't matter, right? Like if your model accurately predicts what's happening, whether or not it's accurately reflecting like the baseline motivators is not that important. Does that make sense?
It sounds like what you're saying is it's pretty loose to say that it's because of this, or really even could be because of this. In my position, like I'm one of those guys that is in front of a computer more often than I'm interacting with a customer, because I'm an operations manager. I don't have as much bar time as the managers that I manage, who manage the stores. You see, so I'm so far removed from that in that sense. So I have to make an interpretation in a decision, but I also have to relate it back to the values of the company. So I like your answer, as much as, it's it depends answer, because then if you were to answer it, then it kind of feeds into this desire to have a quick and simple answer, which is kind of what you're saying we shouldn't do with data.
Well, I think no matter what, any answer is just for now. I think the most important thing really is to have strong beliefs loosely held, right? Because tomorrow isn't necessarily going to be like today. And the customers you have next week might not be like the customers you had last week. So it's not really a matter of like measuring once and deciding. It's a matter of like trying stuff and seeing if anything changes. And it really is a matter of like constant tweaking. And I mean, I kind of see established business as like all established businesses kind of being that way. You make like once you're going and once you are able to make payroll and sort of revenue is growing in an appropriate way, I mean, and you've got that sort of product market fit, as we say on kind of this side of the industry, that's when you start to experiment, you start to tweak, right? Like you're not making huge changes at that point. If the ship starts to sink, I think that's when you start to make huge changes.
One question to the point of applying data that, my manager had two questions actually. How do we use data to care for staff? I mean, I can think off the top of my head, like about payroll. We've mentioned it a few times in the conversation today, and being able to know if you can afford to give that much more money per hour to that particular barista at that store. In your experience, how can we use data to help support staff?
That's a great question. That's something that's kind of near to my heart. I think I have a pretty unorthodox perspective on the relationship between an employee and an employer. We don't have to really get into that. If anybody wants to harass me on Twitter, I'm happy to get into it, like 140 characters at a time. But I think, especially in terms of payroll, I do think that you need to be frank with people. And I think when that conversation starts with being really transparent and frank about the business being a business and revenue being the sea upon which the business floats, then you open up this whole realm of transparency that I think is generally locked away right now in a way that's really not responsible. I think that when you say to someone like, well, like we had a $12,000 day on Saturday, that's huge. Like that's the biggest day we've had all year. And like, here's what that means. Like, here's how that like resonates out, right? Like that amount of money means that we can now like do X. And if we keep making like this amount of money every Saturday, that means that like Y and Z could be long-term prospects. And once you start having those conversations about dollars and cents and the way that they sort of reflect the actual tangible reality of what's happening day to day in the shop, then you can also start to have conversations like, well, the reason that we pay what we pay is due to factors X and Y. And like these factors have an impact on you. And like, okay, here is literally the spreadsheet that I use to determine staffing needs. Like if you think that given the staff we have or given the training program that we have, like we could make do with one fewer person at like this volume level, then we could justify like a salary bump in this range. But if you think, like I think, that we need this many people for that time to maintain like mental stability and customer satisfaction and like cleanliness and quality, well then like this is like what we have to pay. And I think that if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation with the people that work for you, then I think that should indicate to you that you've maybe got an ethical quandary around salary. Because if you're not comfortable saying to someone like, there are like economic justifications for the salaries that we have at this establishment, if you aren't comfortable saying that and like outlining it, well then the problem isn't that your people want to get paid more. The problem is like you don't have a very well-grounded sense of why you're paying what you're paying.
Wow, that's powerful.
Oh no.
I think it was going to be my next question. There's fear that people have, and maybe they can't articulate it necessarily. Just feel icky talking about what the company makes, because they're afraid that then the barista will say, well, why am I not making more money when we're making like $1 million a year at this company? That should mean that I get paid more. Those types of fears, if they're not dealt with head on with transparency, it sounds like you're saying, then you're kind of feeding into this cycle of distrust or mistrust, employee to employer or employer to employee, and it can be broken by simply being open and honest about the implications of that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, those objections are so interesting to me, to say like we can't talk about money to the folks who, I mean, is there anyone working at a cafe for whom the commercial aspect is more tangible than the person literally collecting the money? Right. Like, do you think the folks like saying like that latte is $3.75 aren't aware that there's like a business happening around them? I'm being flippant, but I think it also, and this again kind of gets into my maybe incorrect mental model of like employment, but I think I would rather be in a position where like I can say to someone who works for me, yeah, like right now, like this is what we're able to pay you and here's why. And if you think like you're being underpaid or you think you could get paid more elsewhere, well, like this is, the job market is a job market. Like if the only reason that you want to work with me is like the paycheck at the end of the day, like maybe there's like a bigger underlying problem there, but like it allows you to put the question back on them, right? It's like, well, like make some value. Like you look at this place, like, like here's what we pay for chocolate syrup. Like, can you make chocolate syrup here that is cheaper than that and is at least as good as what we serve now, right? It's like, okay, like help me be a part of this business, right? In that way, it really, if you engage in this kind of trust and you engage in these kind of conversations, it opens you up to kind of a whole new world of innovation. The downside of that is you've got to put your money where your mouth is, right? And on some level, like that conversation becomes like a little bit more awkward because you have to say, okay, cool. So now, like, kind of going with the example that we're playing with before, right? Okay, so we're not ordering, sorry if you're sponsored by Monin. Okay, so we're not ordering like Monin syrup anymore. Now we're making our own chocolate syrup in-house and we're saving like 4 cents a bottle. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Like you've like added some value to the company, but we order like 7 of those a week, right? So, and I can't, so everyone gets an extra like quarter of a penny per paycheck period, right? Like the kind of abstraction of it, the kind of multiplicative effect of a large staff becomes, I think, maybe demotivating there. I don't know. It's an interesting problem, but I do think, you kind of can get to a better place through transparency and through trust.
Excellent. And I feel this conversation already happens, but between management and customers, when we raise prices, like last week, we just raised our prices for like the first time in 3 years, which, or 4 years actually. So we're wringing our hands wondering like, oh, what are people going to think? But we're just honest about what we've been investing into the company in terms of increasing the number of staff on shift so that we can handle the amount of business that's, increased year over year to make people happy. And we've invested in better equipment and, higher priced coffees, all these things. Basically, we instruct our staff to simply tell people about the fact that we are investing back into the company to create a better coffee experience, and that's the reason for it. And we have people react to that so positively, even people saying, "Good, you need to make more money," which is the best reaction you could have. So it's not like we don't talk about it already. We should. I like where you're going with that, and I actually 100% agree. We need to talk with our staff openly and frankly about that. I want to kind of get into some practicalities here. And not that what we've been talking about hasn't been practical, because I think so much of what has been said already can be really paradigm shifting for so many people listening right now.
It's also easy for me to say,
well,
but yeah, let's do it. Let's dive into like the nitty gritty. Let's get down to tactical tax. We've been talking strategy for a while.
Yeah. So when it comes to, I'm looking at the data. I'm looking at my sales trends on Square.
Okay.
And I'm looking at all these different pieces of information. I've got to make my company better. Cool. It's part of my job. Definitely. I work at a company where mainly I just need to make things better and sustainably better. What is the first step that we need to take to the end of solving a problem?
So super practically, something I think a lot of folks can appreciate is figure out what items you sell make up 80% of your revenue. That's a great first step, because I know when I was working here in Saratoga Springs, we had I want to say like 89 like top menu like POS items, like outside of customizations and stuff, right? Like outside of like no mayo, extra whip, something like mid 80s, like low 90s maybe, and 18 menu items made up 80% of our revenue.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was, for me, that was a real light bulb. It was like, we are spending a lot of time and inventory and like mental capacity worrying about items that represent such a tiny amount of our revenue. And something I love that I'm seeing more and more in cafes, even here in Saratoga Springs. We've got this kind of a cafe crew coffee. Shout out to those guys. And they've got this super minimal menu, and I love it. I'm crazy about it. And I think that is such a good way to go. And I think especially for folks who really dig on progressive coffee right now, I think that minimalist piece is kind of interesting and kind of exciting. It's like, yeah, we do 4 things. We kick ass at all of them. And like, if you want like a strawberry mocha frappuccino, like there's plenty of places to get it, but this isn't one, right?
Right.
And I get that that's also not viable for everyone. Like, let me please be clear that, yeah, like if you've got a cafe on a beachfront in a tourist town somewhere, I get it. Like, you got to have frozen blended drinks. Like, that's your bread and butter. But that's why I'm not saying like everybody's got to have a cortado and an espresso and that's it. What I'm saying is figure out where 80% of your revenue comes from, and then take a hard eye at the other stuff. Like, if it turns out your charcuterie plates take 25 minutes to make and represent less than 1% of your revenue, like, it's probably time to reconsider that menu item.
80% of your items that bring in or 80% of the revenue could be that strawberry mocha frappuccino. And so your minimalist menu might just be made up of frappuccinos.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, I've got no beef with that. Whatever pays your mortgage and like makes your staff stoked to work there and like makes your customers excited to come back, like, that's a good business. Like, a good business isn't defined by like how much you pay per pound of green coffee. A good business is defined by like keeping your doors open, making your customers super excited, and making your staff happy to come to work every day.
So bringing up that idea of becoming more minimal or taking a hard look at things that aren't working brings up another question for me, which is what are some steps that I can take to identify the problems in my cafe and use data to kind of help solve those problems?
Sure. I can speak to that. So yeah, we can kind of do this now. This can be like a mental exercise. Okay, everybody. So close your eyes and just total gut. Think about the place that you work. Think about your day to day. Okay, so look, what's the biggest frustration that you have day to day? Is it staffing? Is it scheduling? Is it ensuring freshness? Is it getting your chalkboard like chalked up properly? I don't know. Okay, so you've got your biggest problem in your head. All right, this is my biggest problem right now. And okay, so with that biggest problem, ask yourself, okay, if this problem went away, if this problem were completely solved, if this problem were to dissolve and no longer be part of your cognitive landscape, all right, now what would your day look like, right? How would your world be different if this were no longer a problem? Okay. So step one, identify your biggest problem. Step two, imagine the world without that problem, or rather with that problem solved. So a world much like our world today, but this one particular problem has been solved. Now, three, when you think about the world as it is and the world as it would be with this problem solved, what's the difference, right? And more importantly, like, how can you measure that difference? So an example might be, okay, I am perpetually overstaffed on the weekends. And the way that it would look better would be if I was appropriately staffed on the weekends, if I didn't have people kind of standing around, if I didn't feel like I was paying like a lot of folks to kind of be at the cafe when I need to be at the cafe. Okay. So the way that those would be different would be, my like staffing numbers would like more closely map to my like hourly revenue numbers. Okay. So now we're in this position where we've identified our biggest problem. We've figured out what the world would look like if the problem were solved. We have figured out how we would actually measure the difference between those two worlds. So then you just make a plan to like make that measured piece of the difference more like reality, or make reality more like the ideal world. So in this case, you might say, okay, so I'm going to like look back over the last 4 weeks. I'm going to map out my hourly revenue, and I'm going to put that next to the number of people I had working each of those hours, and I'm going to adjust the schedule accordingly. So that's kind of a step-by-step example of one way to like engage with a problem through this mental model to a plan to move forward. And the plan may fail. You may understaff and everyone will be mad at you. That's also possible.
So then you would have to just go back and restart and adjust based on the feedback you got from that failed model.
Mm-hmm. And maybe you missed something, right? Maybe what you thought was your biggest problem wasn't actually your biggest problem. Maybe you just went in one Saturday and you saw someone standing around and that just really got in your craw. I've been guilty of that. And I think, especially in 2017, we have so much of this information at our fingertips. I mean, so much of this stuff is quantified for you already. Just point of sale systems alone can provide you so much context and so much insight. And I think the problem probably is more identifying what you want to do with it, right? And it's that same dump truck full of information. It could just be too much. And you need to kind of create a plan more than you need to like access that information right away, if that makes sense.
Right. And that plan should be based on the goal that you have for your particular business and where it is. That can be different for everybody. The metric of customer happiness is not necessarily made up of ones and zeros. It's something that you, like you were saying earlier, you've got to observe that. If you're in the midst of piles of data, you gotta discipline yourself to get out there and interact with people and talk with them to see balance that whole set of computer versus human interaction.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think it's also important to be okay like balancing those two things. Like your assistant manager or your shift supervisor doesn't know everything and doesn't have a complete picture of the world, but neither do you. And kind of being able to listen to both of those things and understand like, oh, well, like, Frank works the lunch shift during the week and he really tends to when customers are upset, like it really gets to him. Like an unhappy customer really causes him to like perceive a shift to be much worse than it was. So like you really need to get to know folks and kind of understand the way that their experience can affect their reporting and find a way to balance that against like whatever your hard numbers are. I think it can work in the other direction too. I think sometimes we kind of get caught up on looking at your POS data and your kind of data trends first, but you can go from the other side. I recall, when I was working at 7 Stars in Providence, a job, it was such a great job. And I still look back so fondly on the people that I worked with there. Anyway, yeah, great place to work. Still best baguettes I've ever had. And I've been to Paris.
Great job, 7 Stars. Way to go.
Yeah, it's a real shout out. And I don't think they're even sponsoring the podcast, right?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
And I recall there was a time when I was talking with Jim, who's one of the owners and sort of a baker, and he was saying that he just was sick of muffins, man. Muffins were a pain to make. Like they took a long time to make. Like the ingredients were some of the most expensive ingredients put into anything, and sort of due to the way that humans experience muffins by and large in our like world, like our ability to price our muffins appropriately was restricted. So we had to like at least be in the neighborhood of what people expected to pay for muffins. So that meant that these were a pain to make, super expensive ingredients, and like we didn't make very much on them. They were one of our like lowest margin items. So it's like, okay, let's run an experiment. And I don't know, I am so thankful that they did this. I mean, in retrospect, like it was crazy for me to even ask. And I was like, so let's sell less muffins, right? Like let's sell less of those then.
What?
And sort of the hypothesis was, well, right now we're serving 3 muffins a day, right? So 7 Stars is scratch bake. It's fresh every single day. Nothing is from yesterday. Everything is from that day. And every day we would have 3 types of muffins. So I kind of went in and I tabulated, okay, like we've got 12 muffins with like whatever daily overlaps, and here are our top sellers. So let's sell like 2 a day, and like let's drop these 2 that aren't selling well, and like let's do that for like a month and see what happens. And it worked. So when I say it worked, I mean the like revenue growth week over week continued the way that it always has, right? So there was no exponential increase in revenue. But the average ticket sale went up for people who were buying things with pastries, because like people were buying something other than the muffin if the muffin they wanted wasn't there, right? And if their muffin that they did want was there, they just bought it. So it didn't decrease the average, right? So all changes increased the average, and the time spent on the back end in the bakery like decreased significantly. So in that sense, even though there wasn't this huge revenue jump, it represented a net win, right? And I think especially for this kind of integrated business that has like a scratch bakery on one side and like retail coffee on the other side, like having some communication between those can enable like real significant wins, because just in the P&L for the retail location didn't look like anything happened, right? It wasn't even a blip. But on the bakery side, like making 1/3 fewer muffin per day, like represented a really big win. So in that sense, like when you have more than one system working together, being able to find wins in those systems kind of interacting can be a real potential for victory as well.
Beautiful.
I love that story. I hope I told it well.
Oh no, it was riveting and about muffins too. So well done. So final thoughts, Simon, on data, its use in our workplace, and where we should go from here.
Like I said before, I think it's really important to maintain a sense of curiosity. I think it's very easy to take a very traditional approach to business metrics and say like, well, this is our P&L and this represents like our ability to win and our ability to lose. And the fact is there's a lot that goes into that. And it's okay to kind of tweak the knobs and levers a little bit, to kind of try things out. And in that way to accept that even your P&L, like even your bottom line revenue numbers are themselves abstractions of kind of a bigger and more complicated idea. That is the health of the business. And when we kind of accept that even the P&L is this means to a larger end, then we're able to have more meaningful conversations and more meaningful understandings of kind of the bibs and the bobs of the complicated machine that is your business. And yeah, I know I kind of harp on this a lot, but I think taking a really curious heart and taking a really open mind to the problems of your business, especially when it comes to getting additional voices in. So talking to your shift supervisors, talking to your cashiers, validating what you're observing with your back-end sort of data with their actual experience can be really helpful. And we all miss things. Nobody's perspective is complete. Nobody's perspective is absolute. So getting more voices involved and getting to a place where people believe that they can be frank with you is so important. And one really great piece of that is then problems and questions and sort of interesting things start to bubble up, right? You no longer need to sort of rely on your database to like provide interesting questions. Those are going to start to come out of the people that you work for. Or yeah, I think that's right. The people for whom you work. I don't know. I have kind of a servant leadership model in my brain, but that's again a whole different topic.
I love what you just shared about where to go from here and how to think about it. And I feel like many other people who deal with numbers have been balanced. Even today, just listening to you talk about this, it reinforces some of the inklings that I've had and misgivings about data and its use in what I do, because we work in a human environment and we interact with people behind all of those numbers. And so I think what you've shared with us in this episode is hugely beneficial. And we've got the rest of this year to work all that out on our on the back end and on the front lines and make those two work well together. So thank you so much, Simon, for your time today. And all of this information has been super helpful. Where can people find you?
Okay, cool. So the easiest place to find me, the easiest thing to, I guess, remember is my website is s12k.com. And that's just my name, right? Simon Ouderkirk, S, then 12 other letters, and then K.com. I'm also on Twitter, and that's saouderkirk.com. I'm not going to spell it out. You wouldn't remember it anyway, but you can find that on s12k.com as well. Yeah, and so those would be the easiest ways to get a hold of me. I also live in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is about halfway between Manhattan and Montreal. If anybody's ever stopping through, I'd be super glad to buy you a beer, buy you a coffee, kind of hear what's going on in the coffee world these days. I'm a little tuned out, unfortunately.
Man, it's a beautiful city too, Saratoga Springs.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great spot for sure.
Well, thanks again, Simon, for your time, and I hope you have a really wonderful day and just keep doing amazing work for Automattic and making the world a better place with data.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a real pleasure. I'm happy to come back anytime.
All right. Well, what did I tell you when we first started out here? Just a fantastically helpful conversation with Simon. Insights that you can use as a foundation for how you understand all of the data that's available to you. And I think, the balance that we strike between being nose deep in the numbers and face-to-face with the staff and customers, that's a great place for us to start on how to approach this subject. Go from here and take inventory. Take an assessment of where you sit with how much time you spend on the analytics of your store, the numbers, and how much time you spend on the floor interacting with the customers and the people that create those numbers and generate those things based on their purchasing habits and how they interact with your product in your shop. Hugely beneficial for me to hear that because, I know for myself, because I'm a cafe operations manager, which means there's a tendency to kind of go down the rabbit hole of the numbers and be a little heavy on that side. And part of that is the necessity of the job. But I can work a lot more on being on the floor, observing what's happening in the stores so that I can get a complete picture of what's going on instead of just kind of allowing myself to be lulled into a sense of satisfaction by assessing the numbers and the year-over-year increases or higher averages per ticket, things like that. I got to discipline myself to go out there and complete that picture. And so if that's you, I challenge you to join me in that. And the reverse might be true for you, which is that you don't really care about numbers, maybe. If that's the case, kudos to you for listening to this whole episode. Well done. But you spend a lot of time out there interacting, but maybe you don't know the numbers as well as you should, which is leaving another piece of the puzzle out that is needed to complete the whole, to have a healthy shop. You can make decisions on what items to not sell anymore, or things that you should sell more of, and create plans for making your business a healthier and more profitable business. Create more revenue, which means you can support your staff easier and create more room for them to grow and offer better quality. So the numbers of the store, if you're more on that side of, you tend to be heavy on the social and relational, they can complete the picture for you when it comes to looking at the overall health of your store. There's a lot more said in this episode, and I want you all to be able to reference that. And it's available on the show notes over at keystotheshop.com, over on the resources page, which I've linked to in the show description here on iTunes. It's just a downloadable PDF of the key takeaways and the main points of today's episode. So if you like the show and you want to help out Keys to the Shop and like what we're doing, then please subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share the show with a friend. It all helps a lot. It would be absolutely huge if you did that, and I'd be forever in your debt. So thank you in advance for that. I'd love to hear from you too. Honestly, I just would love to hear your feedback, your comments, questions, or if you just want to say hello, just type hello and send it. That's fine too, I suppose. So you can do that by sending me an email at chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. So I hope you all are energized to go out there and tackle this issue, to approach the numbers and data and your shop's metrics in a balanced and healthy way that'll just make a huge difference in your stores. And I really hope that you have an amazing week. And as always, keep being inspired by people and coffee, because they are the keys to the shop.